Hey everybody, this is Patrick from Sasquatch in the Wild. So, after hiking to a point, I get to a series of logs, and these logs go from my right from the stream, which is to my right, and it goes all the way up this hill. And I know somewhere up there is the trail to Mammoth Mountain and beyond because it's part of the Colorado Trail. So I'm sitting there looking at structures, and I can see the repeats, and I can see the crazy looking checkered piece that I'd shown, and I'll put it back up on one of these things. And I saw another teepee way off from that, and then I saw another checkered pattern, and I could see another teepee further on down, and I was like, oh my god, this is insane. But there's this row of trees, and I was like, this is crazy looking. So I get ready to step over this log, and I hear and I pull my leg back, and then once my leg hits the ground on the side that I'm standing on, it goes and it quits. And I slowly start to look around, and I'm expecting to see a mountain lion or a bear, but it didn't sound like neither one of those things. In fact, it sounded kind of like a person, and I was like, that's odd. And so I look all the way around. I don't see anybody. Now I can hear people over at the campsites on the other side of the river, and I can hear people way up on the trail coming down. I can hear them kind of laughing and giggling and talking way off in the distance. So I know it's somewhere to my left, and I know there's people to my right, and there's a stream to my right too. And I was like, well, that's weird. So I take a step again I start to put my foot over that log, and I hear and I pull my foot back, and it quits. And I was like, okay, this is weird. So I start to look up in the trees. I'm expecting now to see maybe a mountain lion looking down at me, and I'm looking all around real slow, real careful, like nothing. There's nothing. Now there is a tree to my direct left, and it goes up, and whatever it is, I think is right here, and I am really hesitant of turning and looking up. For whatever reason, anything that's growling and snarling at me, the last thing I want to do is look up at it. So I was like, okay, well, I think I'll just try to take a quick step. So I was gonna step over that log again, and it right away was and when I put my foot back, it quit. So I was like, I was like, okay, so stepping over the log was a bad idea. I'm not gonna do that, even though I want to go all the way down and see what's all the way down there. I'm basically being told, don't do it. Don't take that step. Just don't do it. It's not good. Don't do it. Okay. So I look at the logs and look all the way up, and I said, well, if I can't step over the logs, I'm just going to follow these logs all the way up. So I turn and I walk all the way. I just start following these logs all the way up. And, as I'm hiking that way and I start going up the hill, I turn and I look back down. And the tree that I was at, there was nothing in it. So clearly by the time I got to a point and I turned, whatever was in that tree either jumped down, climbed down, and it hid, and I had no idea where it went to at that point. I didn't hear anything running up, tracking me all the way up, and I ended going all the way up to the top of this area. When I cleared it, and I finally found the Colorado Trail, I was winded. I was like, holy crap, that was a climb, because I just literally went up at that point, and I was like, Jesus. But there was the trees were thicker as I was going up. They were thicker going all the way up in. Once I got to the trailhead and I was sitting there, I come across a lady, and she was hiking down the trail, and she said, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I was just had a weird experience down there. And she said, oh, and I said, where are you coming from? And she said, oh, I'm on the Colorado Trail. I'm doing the hike through. She's hiking all the way down to wherever it ends. And I was like, oh God, does that take like 3 months to do? And she goes, yeah, exactly. It takes about 3 months. And I said, how long have you been doing this? And she said, I'm a month into it. She got 2 more months on that trail to hike. And she had her backpack. It was all packed out. And I said, you're doing this all by yourself? And she said, yeah, there's a handful of people that are doing it every year. And I'm part of that group. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. So I gave her some basic information, and I said I'm starting up a YouTube channel. Was explaining this to her, and she goes, "Oh, that's great." And she goes, "What are you doing it for?" And I said, "Oh, I'm studying Bigfoot. I'm looking into the different sightings and stuff, and I've had some pretty crazy experiences here." I said, by chance, did you hear that vocal the other night?" And she said, "Yeah, I was up on the mountain." She was one of the people that told me about what they were experiencing. And every time they heard that scream, everybody was running down the mountain to get to that spot where they thought the person either jumped or tried to die. But when they, in the morning, some of them went down there and they looked over the edge and they didn't see anybody. They didn't see nobody over the edge. And so they were like, "That's so weird." But they all heard the same thing, that while they were in the campsite and they were all hunkered in there after the second scream, they heard something come walking back through. And nobody peeked outside. Nobody wanted to know what that was, because they said whatever was coming through that down the trailhead back through the camp and out onto the Colorado Trail had heavy footsteps. They could hear the it didn't sound like a shoe. They said it sounded like a heavy foot that was exposed to the ground, so they could hear the slapping of the foot as it was walking by. But they said whatever it was big. Just by the sound alone, they could tell that there was something there. And I was like, oh my God. So I kept hiking up. So I said, "Well, have fun on your hike." And she goes, "Well, have fun on your camping trip." And I said, "Thanks." And she went ahead and left, and I followed the trail. And I veered around to a spot, and I'm coming around this corner, and I can see down into the valley, and I can see Leadville. From that point, you can see down and see Leadville. I was like, wow, I can see Leadville from up here. It's cool. So as I'm going around now, there's no trees really to my immediate right. There is, as I'm walking up, there are trees here, and I'll draw a picture of this thing. But as I'm going around this bend, and the bend kind of does this number a little bit, and there's trees, and then there's like nothing, and then there's trees off in the distance, and deadfall all up here on my left, and these, like a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, and wife, they come hauling. They're hauling back. They're like, "Oh my God, did you see that? Oh my God, we have to get out of here. We have to get out of here fast." And I was like, "What'd you guys see?" And they're like, "Oh," and they just clammed up as fast as they could, and they ran past me and went back down the way I came, or roughly, they were going all the way down the trail. And I was like, "What'd you guys see? What did you see? What did you see?" And they want nothing to do with it. They did not want to tell me anything. I see somebody else, and they're saying the same thing. "Did you see that? Oh my God, we have to get out of here." And I was like, "What are you guys all talking about? And is it a bear?" And they're like, and they just looked at me funny, and they're like, "No." And they bolted. Two different groups of people saw the exact same thing, and nobody would tell me what it was. So I'm like, what the hell is going on? And then I hear this response. The response is coming from my right, from behind these trees. And what I hear is, "Oh." I say, "Is there somebody over there?" And I walked up to the edge of the cliff, looking over to where, and it was weird. The way this was set up, if you walk too far over the edge, you go, "Wah!" You fall off. But there's this breakaway, and it kind of curves around. So it's like, if this is the ground, it goes around and it bends back around. And there's, from this point, there's a bunch of trees. And the sound of response is coming from right here. And I'm over here. And I'm like, "Hey, is there somebody behind these trees?" "Oh." I was like, "Dude." And it didn't sound like a bear. Didn't sound like a cat. It sounded like almost like a person. And I was like, "You can come out of your hiding spot. I'm not afraid of you. Just come out." And no, The only response I got was, "Oh, oh, oh." And I was like, what's your deal? I don't understand this. I said, "Well, I'm going to go back down. I'm going to head back to my campsite." And I point to the direction where my campsite is. And I said, "If you want to follow me down, that's fine." No sound. So as I'm walking back around the corner and going back down the path, instead of going further up the trail, when I was when I was looking around, I could tell that the sky was getting a little dark, and I was wondering if it was going to rain on me. So I didn't really want to get wet on the mountain, and that would be a lot more colder. But as I turned and started walking back down the mountain, I could hear that individual running down the hill amongst all this deadfall. And I would stop, and I was like looking down into the valley to see where he was at. I couldn't see him, but I could hear him. I could hear his steps. And just sounded like a royal nightmare was going down that hill. And I kept looking to see if I could see this guy, and I couldn't see him. And I know I photographed a picture of a rock, and I think I talked about this. I might be rehashing a little bit part of this. But behind that rock, I was 99% positive that's where that guy was. And it was a pretty decent sized boulder. But again, I was stopped from going back into that area. And whoever was just beyond my visual being able to see him, I never followed him down and through those trees. But he made it down in there, and as I was walking along the path, I could hear something tracking me going. They were down in that valley, and they were moving just a little bit behind me as I was going down heading downhill. And they stopped at some point. Like, they stopped right where those trees were. They were like, that was a no-go for them. And I just kept walking down. Once I came out, that's when I found that box with where you fill out all the paperwork and what I had posted in that other video. And I read through that stuff. I was like, oh, crap, I need to do that. So I went back to camp. Darla was really interested in what I was, what I'd seen, what I'd heard. And then, I said, I'm going to go for another hike. He said, all right. And we were there for a few days. So I went ahead and I hiked back into this area that, now I didn't go into Mount Elbert yet. That's going to be on the next video. But I went back into this other area, and I came across a weird campsite. And I got all the way back in there. The river had split off, and it goes to my left, but it had split off, and it went around this valley area and towards Mount Elbert. And I just started hiking back, and I could hear the water over here. Again, I went back far enough that I couldn't see people, I couldn't hear people. But I came across a pretty decent sized tree, and this tree was massive, and it was laying down, and I was like, how the hell? So I had to climb over this thing, and that was tricky. But I got over this thing, and I kept walking. I could see where the trail went, and I was like, why would anybody drop a tree here? And it just went straight across this path. I went walking all the way back, and I got to this crazy campsite. And I was like, well, this is interesting, and it's very secluded. Beautiful view of the river. Can't really hear anybody behind you. And I just was like looking around going, this is gorgeous. I love this. And I'm 90% positive I took photographs of this. But when I turned around, I looked up into this tree, and there were a pair of boots that were tied off. And they were at least 15 to 20 feet on a branch up this tree. And the branch was only about like this long. I was like, why would they do that to somebody? Because I figured someone, as out of a joke, or maybe they were drunk, and they just threw their boots up, and they got thunk, and they hooked there, and they stayed there. And those boots, I think, are probably still there up in this tree. But it was crazy to see that thing up there. And so I started looking around, and you could see where the path kept going further and further and further back. And you'd see another tree, and so I was like, well, let's go. I'm going to walk a little bit further. And I kept walking back further and further, and I could see a structure way off to my left. I could see something off to my right, and I got to the next tree, and I was like, oh my God. And it seemed like almost every 30 yards, there was another big tree that was going across the trail. Like, the Forestry Service didn't want you to keep going on this trail, which I did. I climbed over that tree, and I kept going. I got to a point where I started getting a little uneasy because I was getting so far away from everybody that it wasn't feeling comfortable. And so I just kind of sat there for a minute, looked around, took some photographs, turned around, and I started hiking back. The uneasy feeling kind of went away. I could hear the rock clacking and happening again over to my right side, which is where the river is, and I went over to where the river was. And again, I listened closely to the river's edge, and I could hear the clacking of the rocks smacking against each other. And I was like, God, that is so weird, because you would be, if you're not used to that sound and you start hearing it, it may actually draw you away from possible targets for you to go look at. And instead you're walking over along a river trying to figure out where the rock clacking is coming from, and it's just coming from the river itself. It could be coming from a Sasquatch banging rocks together, or maybe trying to get to a clam or something in the river. There's a lot of clams in around the local rivers in Colorado. Nebraska's got a gazillion of these things. If you've never done this before, it's kind of fun to do. But if you are curious to try this, go to a river when it's warm and put your hand down into the sand and kind of feel, and just keep going down. Eventually you're going to find yourself a mollusk. The mollusk can be a really small little mollusk, about so big, or they can be about this size, about the size of my hand. And they're pretty big too. If you pull one out and it feels really heavy, you've got a live one. If it feels light and the shell is kind of cracked, it's probably dead. But if you have a live one and you feel the weight, some of that's going to be water weight, but some of that's going to be the animal. And if you're really hungry, that's food. If you can get that sucker open, rip it up, and get to the meat on the inside, you cook it and swallow it, But I won't do that, because I took one of those things home, threw it in my fish tank, and just watched it shed off all of the black, and it had this beautiful golden yellow look to it. And this thing crawled around in my tank for probably about 2 years before my Plecostomus found it, grabbed it, and shook it to death, and the rest of the fish ate it. But besides that, if you ever want to know if there's critters in and around a river, put your hand down inside the sand and start digging around, and you're going to find them. You're going to start pulling these things out. And once you find one, you're going to find 10 or 20 or 30 or 40, and they're going to be everywhere, because those things are, when they're in the rivers, they're actually filter feeding all the crap out of the water. So it makes it cleaner for everybody else. But if you're hungry, that's a free food source. Outside of, say, the crawfish or the fish that are in the river, you also can pull out clams that are about that size, that big around, or larger. Yeah, it's pretty impressive if you can find them. If you can actually dig them out and find them, yeah, you've got a meal. So I ended up hiking back, and the very next night, or the very next day, that night we really didn't have too much of anything. I think I was too tired to actually remember too much of that night. But the next day, I decided I wanted to climb up Mount Elbert, and that gave me my deja vu, and I had my encounter up. I had a couple weird situations up on that mountain, and that video I'll talk about that on Sunday. So again, my name is Patrick. This is Sasquatch in the Wild, and I hope you enjoyed this little bit of a chit chat. Sorry for the flicker. The flicker I can't do anything with so far, but hopefully we'll get my electrical fixed in the near future, and I'll be putting up video directly from my computer, which won't have any flicker on it, straight to YouTube. Okay, so I'll talk to you on Sunday. See you later.